Okay, we'll bring the meeting to order. And roll call, please.
Representative Brown.
Here.
Representative Campbell.
Here.
Representative Lean. Here. Representative Lucas. Representative Riggins. Representative Storer.
Here.
Representative Stivar.
Present.
Representative Worf.
Here.
Chairman Locke. All present, Mr. Chairman.
Me and this mic, we have a little trouble. Thank you for everyone who's coming back, and I will apologize for taking more of your time on a Friday night, but thank you for your patience and working with us. And I'll hit the decorum script really quick. Just remember, please, cell phones off. Please be respectful of the speakers and each other. Please keep it quiet in the crowd. Let the people speak. And just, again, give others the respect you would expect yourselves, and that would be great. And again, thank you all for coming back, and I'll thanks in advance for your testimony as we move forward. We're moving forward now with, or we're continuing with House Bill 169 today, and that's the only bill that will work. Homeowners tax exemption 2025 and 2026. And I know there was some testimony before we ended the last meeting, and we will continue on from there. And I know there was a couple of you kind of right at the end, and I know we cut some of you short, like Mr. Ryman and others. If you would like to speak more, that is fine, if you're okay. Then at this point, I think we're going to move straight into, and one other thing on decorum, and I think probably this is the wrong room to have to say this, but just remember, work everything through the chair, please. Let's be sure we stick to that decorum component. So moving forward on House Bill 169, we're open to, I think, anybody. I think we've got some time, so let's go ahead. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. And one other thing, everyone, please say your name slowly and please very clearly. We just want to make sure. I know in some of the committees, people say their names so fast and so run together that it's very hard, and I want to make sure we get this very clear so everybody can address people appropriately. We can be respectful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my last name is a doozy. So my name is Ashley Harpstreeth. I am the Executive Director for Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I've had the pleasure of, I think, speaking to about almost everyone on this committee so far, maybe not Representative Campbell, so I'm just going to do a very quick intro about what WAM is and who I am, and then I'll be done with those. But we are a 501c6 private nonprofit association. We've been the foundation of support for all of Wyoming's 99 municipalities since our organization in 1928. We provide vital education and training resources that enhance the capabilities of all of our local elected officials and other municipal leaders. We promote policies that prioritize local decision-making, ensuring the voices of our 68% of the citizens who reside within these communities are heard and respected. We believe the best government is closest to the people, rooted in simplicity, accountability, and self-governance. And we want to affirm Wyoming's Constitution and Article 13, Section 1, which is home rule, and it empowers local leaders to make decisions for their communities. Guided by all these principles and our 2025 WAM legislative agenda, we're committed to preserving the constitutional authority of local governments to serve effectively and independently. With that said, we understand, because we share constituents, the need to relieve our shared pain and high property taxes. However, with the 50% cuts in backfill and the no backfill of the second year, we are really concerned and are in opposition at this point. Since you'll be cutting local revenues, which all look a little different, and are reliant on property tax in different ways, I'd like to put some thought into what's being cut and thoughts of types of challenges each municipality will face. Just like the state, municipalities are faced with providing critical services to their residents. In all cities and towns, most of the general funds make up for things like police and fire services, public safety communications, 911 dispatch, street maintenance and repair, parks maintenance and repair, providing financial matches for grants for public transit and victim services. For a city like Casper, the quantifiable value of an exemption of this bill would provide would be a year two impact of 2.2 million that they would not have the revenue to backfill, meaning a question of which services we spoke about above would they'd have to cut to make the difference. With the exemptions that have already been provided, they have to plan for another $550,000 annually in year two, if not more. With City of Evanston, just on this bill, they're looking at a $500,000 cut. When you look at a small town like Mountain View, they're looking at a $60,000 reduction. So it does vary per community, but every dollar matters to them. I would like to introduce one of my Cheyenne council members so she could give you a little bit more context for what that looks like for her community. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to be here and members of the committee. My name is Kathy Emmons, and I am a councilwoman for Ward 2 here in Cheyenne. I've been in Wyoming for 40 years and in Cheyenne for about 36, 37 years. And I'm speaking today in opposition to House Bill 169. Cheyenne levies the full 8 mills allowed by statute. For a $400,000 house here in Cheyenne, the city receives $304, which is 11% of the total property tax collected. For FY25, property taxes were estimated at $8.5 million here. Using the percent residential value to the total value for Cheyenne from the Department of Revenue, we estimate that Cheyenne will lose $2.97 million if this bill passes without backfill. For FY25, payroll costs are approximately 72.9% of our general fund budget. This is followed by gas and utilities, fleet, parts, fuel, labor, support agency appropriations, computer software and hardware maintenance, supply and general maintenance. The top 10 of those expenses comprise 93.5% of the general fund. The remaining 6% covers essential areas like staff training, jail costs, 9/11 combined communications, telecommunications, capital expenditures, and more. Given this budget structure, the city would have no cost but to cut personnel if the revenue loss occurs. In the best case scenario, we would need to cut 30 positions to offset the reductions in property tax revenue. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like, entry-level firefighters, when you look at their benefits and salary, come up with about $107,000 when you look at both of those areas. Starting police officers' salary and benefits is $103,479. Since these positions typically have higher salaries than those in Parks and Rec or administrative roles, the cuts would likely extend to 40 to 50 positions overall that we would lose in Cheyenne. This would significantly impact our operations and our ability to serve the community effectively. Reductions in staff could lead to slower emergency response times, decreased public safety, and reduced capacity to handle critical incidents. Additionally, it can result in slower processing of permits, licenses, and other public services, less time and resources for training, comprising the effectiveness and safety of the remaining staff, deferred maintenance of facilities, parks, vehicles, and equipment, resulting in deteriorated infrastructure, which we know results in higher costs in the long term, delayed or canceled capital expenditures, which would reduce investments in critical infrastructures that support our community and our local commerce, reduction and elimination of programs and events that contribute to the community well-being, affecting the quality of life for our residents, decreased funding for organizations that assist vulnerable populations, and increased workloads for remaining staff, leading to burnout and decreased morale, which we also know leads to increased turnover, which is a challenge for all cities. In summary, these cuts would diminish the city's ability to maintain current service levels, jeopardize our public safety, and compromise the long-term health and growth of the community. This is why, if you support this bill, the inclusion of backfill provision is critical to mitigate these impacts. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman. I would stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm struggling a little bit. You said you're speaking against the bill, but the bill has within it a backfill. Do you feel that the backfill is insufficient, or are you saying you doubt that that can pass?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I don't think the backfill is sufficient, and I'm concerned, as I read the bill, that there is no backfill for the second year. So that's a grave concern.
Thank you.
Any follow-up?
Yeah, just, I guess I don't see the concern, but because there is a provision that says in the event that it's not sufficient, the state will come up with additional funds to make up that shortfall. And I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if I may ask one more question. I know I received an email from Home asking about how this impact the special districts, in particular the fire districts. And I can remember, I didn't want to misrepresent it to one of my constituents. So I wanted to know, can we get that answered again? Does this have any impact on the special districts?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Representative Wharf, I think that I'm going to point it back to you because
I was just going to say, this might be better for me to make clear.
Yeah.
So the backfill is 50% the way it is currently structured. It is 50% for both years. So it is over the 2 years, but it is at the 50%. So that does affect all entities. So I'm sorry, I'm just clarifying on the bill so everybody can see that clear. So that is the case. It's 50% over, but over both years is how it is currently structured. Sorry, so.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Please.
the numbers I did represent were 50% of their collections that they were anticipating that we represented.
Right.
So, okay.
Other questions?
And Mr. Chairman, whether or not this impacts the special districts, and particularly fire districts, I was under the impression that it did not, because it's protected by the backfill as well, is it not?
And I'll answer that. They would all be affected the same. Theoretically, that 50%, so they would all be impacted by that same 50% backfill for the 2 years. So,
And my point being, what I'm trying to make sure that I capture is the fact that it is the intention of this bill that the exemptions that are implemented will be covered so that the local government, whether it's a special district, whether it's a county government, whether it's police, sheriffs, whatever, those people that are dependent on that, the backfill is supposed to make them whole, correct?
the backfill only takes them to 50% of the amount that they would receive in the absence of the exemption, only up to 50%.
Okay, thank you.
Mr.
Other-
Chairman,
go
Mr.
ahead,
Chairman, if I
please.
may, one point I forgot, and then I'll be done, is these are general fund dollars, which affect our budgets completely different. I know when you look at the total budget, especially in our bigger communities, you might think that there's a lot of funding to backfill and to take these cuts. But a lot of our funds are enterprise funds that would fund like sewer and water and landfills, and Council Member Emmons could probably give you a lot more examples. And so they're very directed. And then with all the other conversations, we left Senate revenue, there's a lot of reductions coming that way. So we implore you to look at all the bills and how they're gonna layer, because not only are we bracing for this, but there could be other ways and, or other things that are coming. There's bond elections we're looking at that we want to be supportive of, and sales tax revisions that change the way that we're able to levy all of our levers. So general fund dollars are very important, and that's what funds our salaries and provide us safety and a lot of the services that we're trying to provide. So we just want to make you aware of what our group is looking at as we brace for this, so.
Thank you. Any other questions? Representative Lean.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you for coming today. I'm curious to know if you know the numbers that you stand to lose over the long-term homeowners exemption that went into play this year.
The 4%?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I do not.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, would that be the 4%?
No, the long-term homeowners.
Oh, the long term,
Yep.
okay. I can get those for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We do appreciate that. Anything you can bring to us would be great. Other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know the councilwoman probably heard all the same things we have for the last 2 years. I would like to ask the director of WHAM, you've been hearing the very same complaints we have. So has WHAM come up with any ideas what they think would be a fair and productive way for property tax relief and shared it with their clients?
Ms. Harpsworth.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, we are always looking for ways that we can, just like you are, how can we be more efficient? When should we be levying the best of our mills? I know some of our municipalities do not levy the full mills if they're able to meet their budget. I think the chairman and I have had a lot of productive conversations. The past revenue committee, and then in my past positions, we've talked a lot about tax reform and tax structure versus tax relief. There was a lot of measures that we worked really hard on last year. And it sounds like there's some appetite for a little bit more. And so we just want to be part of that conversation. There's not a magic bullet. It's going to take all of us talking through tax reform and tax structure issues for the state of Wyoming.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming up. So anyone else who would like to speak? Thank you, Secretary Gray. Appreciate you. Thank you for coming to our
Yes.
committee and speaking. We appreciate
Well,
that.
thank you. I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State, and I want to thank the committee for their work on House Bill 169. I want to thank Chairman Locke for his work on this issue. And the first thing I want to do is give a little bit of a history and the background on this exemption idea. Because it's near and dear to my heart. In 2020, we saw the property tax storm coming. And that's when we started filing cap bills. Filed one in 21, there was another version in 22, and there was another version then in 2020 as well, I believe. And all of them failed. And Representative Jennings, myself, a couple other conservative members, former Representative Baker, decided to go on, asked to go on the House Revenue Committee, and we were really brainstorming, the entire committee was brainstorming on what's a constitutional way for us to achieve this property tax relief. And there was a matrix that LSO came up with. Mr. Wolfson, Mr. Josh isn't here, but there was a matrix they basically came up with. Mr. Anderson came up with, and this was a constitutional way that LSO judged of achieving real property tax relief across the board. And so the committee referred that to the full legislature in 2023. As you know, that bill passed the House and then failed over in the Senate on a 2-3 vote in the Senate Revenue Committee. Then in 24, we had the vehicle that achieved over a 2/3 margin. I believe it was 85% margins in both chambers, and was very disturbingly vetoed by the governor. So here we are in 2025, and we have this vehicle, House Bill 169. And I believe it's very important we get this across the board relief to the finish line. And I think this is a great vehicle to do it. I'm fully in support of it. I also think that our office has now certified the initiative. We fully processed the initiative. And it's going to be the first initiative on the ballot in 30 years in Wyoming. And I think it shows the support from the people for this concept and the right of the people to change laws and to make laws via the initiative process, a very important part of our Constitution, and it's an important part of our duties. And in that vein, I want to underscore the importance of Section 3A, Romanet 2, that this shall not be construed as substantially the same as the People's Initiative to Limit Property Tax in Wyoming through a homeowner's property tax exemption. So it would not be subject to 22-24-319A Romanet 3, which allows the AG in certain instances to prevent initiatives from going on the ballot. That provision of law, I believe it to be unconstitutional. And I'm very concerned that it may be used by this Attorney General. We've seen the governor veto property tax reform in 2024. And the AG, of course, in Wyoming, we're one of the 5 or 6 states that does not have an elected AG. So basically the AG is sort of serves at the pleasure of the governor. And I'm very concerned that anti-property tax relief vein goes across the administration and could lead to an effort to remove the initiative from the ballot, which would make 0 sense because the initiative doesn't overlap in any way with House Bill 169. House Bill 169 is for 2 years, and then the initiative would be for tax years after that. So there is 0 overlap, 0. And so this is very important that is in there, and I think it fits with the fact that the initiative is going on the ballot to say, look, the legislature has seen the support from the people for this, so now we're going to have it for 2 tax years, and then the people will be able to decide whether it goes in perpetuity. And so I think it fits really well with the initiative. I think there's a lot of vision here. I also think that we need to recompense for some of the years. I mean, we've just seen this enormous growth, and the cap came too late. I wish they had taken our advice in 2021. If we'd gotten it done then it probably would have fixed a lot of the whole issue. But because they didn't pass our bill in 21 and 22, you had these 30, 40% increases, up to hundreds of percent increases on Casper Mountain and other portions of the state for year after year after year. And we have to reverse that. And I think this is a great vehicle to do that. And I'll note, I'm still, I appreciate Representative Riggins' question on what is something that the counties and the municipalities are willing to support, because they've pretty much only been willing to support the refund program for the most part, and from my perception. And we'll see, I mean, they're gonna come out with their officials next week, I guess, or the week after, but we have to do something more expansive. And I think this is a very strong vehicle to do it, and I'm fully in support of it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Any questions for Secretary? Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Gray, have they forecast, and we've got 1,000 pieces of paper and I haven't spotted it, but have they forecast what the savings is on the initiative once say it's in place, first year it's in place, how it will compare to what we're planning to do now? The difference in dollars that we'll have to, there's no backfill with that part, so how will that be made up? Or if you understand my question.
Yes, I do.
Secretary.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins. The initiative has 0 backfill. So it isn't clear what would fill that. With that initiative, it's nothing. And if it's passed, and then maybe the legislature would meet and have something or not, or whatever. But I mean, you could divert certain revenue flows into there. I would be against increasing to supplant that.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Secretary Gray. So would you expect if the communities and municipalities, if they don't like this one, they're really not going to like the next one?
Well, you know, Mr. Chairman, I liken it a little bit to the crossover bill. And I love our crossover bill. It's been great. And I look back on the history on that, and there were versions, I mean, we brought that every single year I was in the legislature. And there was a point where we had it at 14 days, the lockout period. There was another version that was 30 days. We wanted to get something done and move the ball a little bit. Granted, that wasn't as strong as I would like it, but every single time the group came together that was against that to prevent that from passing. And what ended up happening is it created a vacuum, and then when we, and then in 23, we passed a 90-day lockout. And so I do think there's an element of momentum really builds when groups try to stop a force that is coming. And so I do think that's something that is very important, you know, to be aware for the localities to think about. I mean, this is something we really need to address. And it's only going to get worse and worse if it's not addressed. And on crossover, it turned out great because we ended up getting a really strong lockout that is really, really strong. And yeah, we had to wait 2 extra years for it or 3 extra years for it. But I can see the same thing here. The momentum just keeps building every single year. And as the groups that don't want this find ways to sort of stop it, I think it's actually doing the opposite effect. It's leading towards, once it happened, being something that is going to go even further in the other direction.
Can I follow up?
Follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Gray, you had mentioned about, and I'm familiar with this being from Casper, so the tremendous increase in property valuations. But let's go back to those smaller counties and where that hasn't really happened. And it's probably happened to a scale, I just don't know what it is. But I wouldn't think you're gonna see 40 and 50% increases in those smaller counties in our northwest or northeast corner. So without those backfills, if we come up short, I guess I'm wondering about the impact to those particular communities with their much smaller reserve of resources.
Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, well, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Riggins. I mean, there are different situations across our state in each county, and that's something I think the committee needs to be aware of. The issue has been, you know, we have these 30 to 40% increases in many counties year after year after year, and then when the legislature tries to propose solutions, the associations come out in strongly opposed fashion, and so it just continues to build this momentum. And I understand the concern, but at the same time, some of it is self-inflicted, in my opinion. And so we have to work together, we really do, but we have to think about every single county's unique situation. And so I think as this bill moves through, we're really going to do that, and I'm looking forward to that. And absolutely, we need to do that. We need to do that. We need to think about every single situation, how it'll affect it.
Thank you. Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming today.
Yes, thank you.
My question is about the People's Initiative. Is that a decrease in property taxes or is that an exemption in property taxes? Do you know the verbiage on it?
Representative Lean and Chairman Locke, thank you. It's an exemption. It's phrased as an exemption. They modeled that initiative off of the exemption that sort of the Revenue Committee from that 21-22 interim brought out, that became basically the parent of this bill as well. It's modeled after that, is what I'm saying. I mean, it's very similar the way they did it, and it goes back to Mr. Anderson's matrix. This was a way of that LSO said was the most constitutional way of achieving, and they basically said it's in their view, constitutional. I want to put words in people's mouths, but, you know, they give opinions and a constitutional way of achieving across-the-board reduction, which we have yet to achieve. And the refund program doesn't cut it. I mean, I know they're going to come up here and I appreciate their opinion, but it isn't across the board. It just isn't. And so this is the constitutional way of doing it. So it kind of became the model for these bills. That's why I kind of want to do the history. And it became, I think, the approach the initiative took.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Representative Storr?
Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your concerns over the access to the ballot initiative by citizens. I think that's important as well. I just want to make sure I understand your thinking around how this and the potential ballot initiative interact. So this would affect 25 taxes paid in this year and the following year, and then that would be on the ballot in November 2026. And should it pass, then it would be implemented in the following year or that year?
Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, I looked at this, Representative Storr, and I believe it's the following year because it would pass in November if it passed.
Okay, so in 2027
Yes.
then. So they wouldn't overlap. They would be,
I do not believe they overlap, and I've asked a couple different people that I respect. I do not believe they overlap. And I think, Mr. Chairman, talking with you a little about it, I think you drafted it to intend that they don't overlap.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
It was drafted to make sure we did not thwart the will of the people, to be honest with you. That was the entire mentality of the bill. Thank you.
just follow up.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Storr.
Just want to go back to the matrix and make sure I understand what you're saying about the opinion of LSO on the constitutionality of the 50% reduction. That was across the board, is that correct?
Well, Mr. Chairman and Representative Storr, I will say that the matrix was applying a 25% reduction, which was the original proposal. I don't think the analysis changes. Now, could I build an argument in my head about how the analysis changes? Yeah, I could. I don't think it's a correct argument. I could see the argument people are going to bring, but I don't think the analysis changes on the constitutionality of 25 versus 50. I don't. I will say too, I wanted to add on from the colloquy that we just got on the last question, it really cues up beautifully, I think, to have this sort of the legislature in alignment with the fact that they've achieved this enormous number of signatures. You're going to say, look, this is where we're going to land for the next 2 years, and then we're going to have the opportunity for the people after they experience it to say, do we want to continue this in perpetuity? And so it just really works well together.
Thank you,
One more
Mr. Secretary.
follow-up.
Representative, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So maybe the number doesn't matter from a constitutional perspective. I guess the question is if the way it's implemented ends up having a different effect on people's property tax, that one property would be at a different rate than another, then would that be constitutional?
Mr. Chairman, or Ms. Secretary.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Storr, elaborate a little bit on your analysis. I mean, how would you end up at that different rate? Are you saying some portions that would not be subject to the exemption and some that would?
Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you're kind of thinking about House Bill 169 because it does have a cap, and that cap is different than what the ballot initiative says. So it would, and I can elaborate on this later, but it would seem to me that it would treat different properties differently as a result.
Well, Chairman, Mr. Chairman, Representative Storr, I mean, that then is that certainly could be applied to a lot of vehicles that have gone through this legislature, certainly the 2% sales tax, but it's an argument. I don't agree with it. I think, but it's certainly an argument.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative, do you have a follow-up? Any other questions for the Secretary? I have one
Yes.
for you. So you'd talked about, one of the things that I was curious about, and I couldn't remember, I know I saw the number somewhere, but I couldn't remember what it was. How many signatures were there? Because I wanted to put that in perspective with the number of voters we have in the state, how many signatures? Because as I recall, it was a very large number. Can you help us with
It
that?
was, Mr. Chairman, I will get it to you, is approaching 30,000. I think it was over 30,000, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Over 30,
That's, I recalled it was somewhere
30.
between 30 or 40, but I could not remember.
It's over 30,000.
Thank you.
Believe it was 31.
Okay. Any other questions for the Secretary of State? Thank you so much, Secretary Gray. We really appreciate your presence here today. Very good. Okay, anybody else want to speak on or for or against the bill, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name's Josh Hannis with the Wyoming Hospital Association. We represent all of the hospitals in Wyoming, and I'll be very brief, and I just wanted to provide some information for the committee. So of our 28 hospitals, 15 of those are special hospital districts they start at 3 mill levies. They can go to the voters for up to 6. Not all of them exercise those full 6 mills, but in any event, just wanted to let you all know about the number of facilities in our state that would be affected by this, and also let you know that our critical access hospitals, of which there are 19, so critical access hospitals are those that are 25 beds or less and at least 35 miles from the next hospital. Every single one of those hospitals had a negative net operating margin in 2023. So as you consider these reductions in taxes and mills that might go to these facilities, and as we consider services we can offer to our communities, I just wanted that on your radar and for your consideration, and I would stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Was your last name Hannis?
Yes, sir.
Did I say that correctly? Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you so much, Mr. Hannis, for bringing that to the attention of the committee. We really appreciate it. Anyone else want to speak on or against the bill? Anybody online? Okay. I guess we wore everybody out on Friday afternoon. I'm sorry about that. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a math question to the director? If she could answer it?
Yeah, if the department wouldn't mind coming up, that would be great. Thank you, Director Henson. We appreciate you being here and keeping us in line. That's good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Brenda
Yes.
Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue, and your question, Representative
Yeah,
Riggins?
Representative Riggins, please.
Thank you, Director. If that number for the, that was originally 25% on this bill, and currently is now sits at 50%, what would you know what the backfill number ends up being using those calculations?
And I know that the administrator of the Property Tax Division has been back there looking at numbers, so I did not. I will say that keeping in mind on all the fiscal notes, we're using 2024 information. So for example, there were 4 new senior citizen districts that voted to form this last year. So any tax that they're asking for, that's an addition. But the only thing we've got is history to go on. But I'm gonna phone a friend. Mr. Gill, do you have any of those numbers? Okay, we will definitely get those to you. So what you're saying is those bills that had a 25% and 100% backfill.
Well, they offered
compared
if
to-
if they had the money at the end, right?
Right. And I did want to point out, and I appreciate the question, in that this bill, it does say 50% for each year, but it says if there's not enough money, we are to prorate that. So if there is not enough money, let's say, what the taxes that are assessed, if we can only pay 40%, because that's all of the money we've got in the appropriation, that's all we can backfill. And it's important to note, we won't know what the total tax amount is until September of 2025. And related to the other tax relief that was passed last year, just important to know that none of that was backfilled. So the 4% cap on the res, the 4% cap on the land, both of those are in place for 2025. Every taxing entity will take a hit on those if it's applicable in their area. And the long-term homeowners exemption that first will go into effect for 2025, that is not backfilled. So important to know that all of the entities have helped in tax relief based on what's already passed.
Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, thank you for coming today. Could you give me a little bit of clarity on the school foundation that receives property taxes versus the school district portion that receives property taxes and how those differ?
Yes. Mr. Chairman, Representative Lean, so there's 12 mills for the school foundation, and that's pursuant to the Constitution. So every dollar of assessed value in Wyoming pays on that 12 mills. The 25 mills for local school support is for each school district, and 25 mills is assessed and applied to the assessed value. So every area in Wyoming is covered by a school district. So every property owner is paying on the 25 mills that goes to that local school district. The Constitution also requires that property owners pay 6 mills to what we call as the county school fund. And this is 6 mills to maintain buildings and properties for each of the counties. And there's a formula on how that is distributed to if there's multiple districts, school districts within each county, and the county treasurers can speak to that. In addition, you've got schools that can levy a recreation mill by the board. The school district board can vote to levy a rec mill. Many school districts do that. I would turn the committee's attention to the Department of Revenue annual report, and you can see that at revenue.wio.gov. And there's actually one page that shows how much the school foundation mills collected in 2024, how much the 25 mills, each of the counties, the 6 mills, which counties also have a bond if they've gone to the voters to get to borrow money. So that pretty much wraps up your K through 12. Now, in addition to that, of course, you've got the community colleges. That is another piece of education. 0 property tax dollars goes to the University of Wyoming. Hopefully that was helpful.
Representative Riggins.
And you may be the wrong person for this question. You mentioned the word bond, so I assume when these go into effect, that ability to capitalize on bonds will also be a little less. Maybe, I'm not sure if that would even be true or not.
Mr. Chairman, so Representative Riggins, what happens with bonds is those bonds that are already in place, and usually, you're talking 10 to 20 years that you're paying back a bond. What happens is there's a principal and interest payment every year. The principal and interest payment is divided by the taxable assessed value, and then a mill levy is calculated. So that value that is removed, ultimately what that does is it means that that tax burden then is shifted to the taxable dollars. So if I have a subdivision, an improvement district, that the voters within that subdivision wanted to pave their roads. So what happens is, they've got a loan. You've got total assessed value when there was no exemptions, or if those exemptions are backfilled. If they're backfilled, it doesn't affect it, right? Because you've still got that total assessed value. But the taxable value where those entities are gonna see those dollars, principal and interest divided by taxable value is the mill levy. So if the mill levy has to be increased because of the reduction in the assessed value, that means all of those property owners, not only the ones that received the exemption, whether it's this 50% or whether it's a long-term property owner, their mill levies are gonna go up. But what that does is it shifts that burden to the people who didn't get the exemption. So if and this is more geared towards the long-term homeowners, but it's just understanding that somehow those bonds have to still be paid. And it just shifts that burden to the taxable value. And I hope that that answered your question.
Any other questions? And I think we were out of people who wanted to speak, but Director, we may have some issues that might make it worth you and Mr. Gill being up here, if that's okay, if you guys don't mind. That would be potentially helpful for us. But anybody else want to speak? Because if not, we're going to go ahead and close public discussion, and we're going to move ahead. And committee, what's your pleasure for the bill? All right. Representative Riggins moves the bill, and the second is Representative Lean. All right, let's start the discussion. Sorry, let me get organized just a little bit here.
Mr. Chairman, may I propose an amendment?
You bet. And we'll kind of go through page by page, but why don't you go ahead?
Oh, you can go ahead, start.
No,
I'll stop
I
you
think
when
we're
I'm
all
there.
right. I think that, let's go ahead. I think you've talked about an initial amendment you thought you'd put in place, and this might be important to have the director here, so why don't you start with that?
My proposed amendment is for page 2, line 5. After the word paragraph, we'll insert, no person shall receive an exemption under this section if the person receives an exemption under this paragraph, and it's 45, but it's in Roman numerals, of this subsection of the same tax year. And the intent of this amendment is just to make it so we can have 50% of the long-term homeowners or 50% based out of this bill, but not both. I have it written down if the clerk needs,
Thank you, Representative Lean. And Director, that was, I know that order was a very important issue here. And I guess there's a question there. Does that amendment make sense in terms of?
Mr. Chairman, I have to admit, I was a little confused, and I guess maybe I didn't follow the amendment. If the intent is that no person, and that's the other thing, we probably need to talk about property. This isn't a person that is qualified, it's the property. So if an exemption, and we can quote the statute number for the long-term homeowners exemption, just stating that basically this exemption is not applicable if the property has received the long-term homeowners exemption.
Representative Lean, was that the intent of that, to make sure? Can you kind of clarify that?
the intent is to make sure that there is no 100% exemptions available, that it's 50% one way or the other. The reason it says person was just so that that person applying could know that they would only apply for one versus the other, but not both. But if I need to make it say the property can only apply for one, but the property doesn't apply for a exemption.
Mr. Chairman, so there is no application, Representative Lean, for this 50% bill? This is across the board. And so, and the question is, if thinking about these two bills, it's important to note when you're looking at the long-term homeowners exemption, that is a 50% exemption on the residential structure and the associated residential land, which provides more tax relief than this bill does. So I wouldn't anticipate that if someone qualified for that, that they would prefer this. But it is important that we wouldn't want to have to explain that to everyone that's coming into the assessor's office. I think it could be clearly explained by the assessor to the taxpayer that's applying that, now, you understand that if you receive the long-term homeowners exemption, you aren't eligible to receive the exemption that was passed in House Bill 169.
And thank you, Director. And Representative Lean, that was how I heard it, because I believe the reference, if, basically, the way it sounded like it was intended is that if you have received the long-term homeowner, you would not be eligible for this. Is that accurate, or with the intent of your amendment?
Yes.
Okay. Was that clear, Director?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, I am also very reliant on Legislative Service Office. They know how to put, as long as they've got this recording, they can hear it. If they understand that that's the intent, they'll do a great job drafting that amendment.
Thank you. And Donna, did you capture that? Great. If you need those words, we'll make sure we get the exact wording to you to make sure we have that. So you have moved an amendment, right?
Is there a second?
Is there a
I was
second?
going to say, Mr. Chairman, it requires a second.
Yes.
Does it not? I would second that amendment.
Representative Worf is a second on that amendment. So let's, committee, let's vote on. Discussion. Oh, sorry. Representative
Mr.
Storr,
Chairman.
discussion on the amendment.
I'd like to ask Director Hansen a question related to the amendment, if possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative?
So, just thinking through this, I'm curious whether you have an opinion, Director Hansen, on whether, while having some people that would qualify for the long-term homeowners exemption and others that would not, does that create a subclass that would result in taxation being unequal?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Storr, I don't have a good answer for that. I do know that when we talk about subclasses, that is typically related to our constitutional requirement that we have right now 4 classes of property, one of those being residential real property. And when we have those 4 classes and the legislature has the responsibility of identifying the level of assessment, then the Constitution allows for a subclass, but it only provides one for owner-occupied homes.
Right.
And so that's typically when we're talking about the class of property, it's related to the Constitution and the class. Now, as far as fair and equal uniform treatment of properties, that's where I think that there might be a question, but I think there might have been a question with the 4% cap. I think there might be a question with any time you don't apply the exact same percentage to all the properties, meaning the, going back to the initiative, so the initiative applies 50% to the residential structure, to everyone's residential structure that qualifies. Now, I do want to point out that the initiative is owner occupied. This bill is not. So just keeping in mind. But you do, if the person qualifies, you apply the exact same percent calculation. Not unlike your veterans exemption. On the veterans exemption, if you qualify for the veterans exemption, you can receive up to $6,000 in assessed value exempted. Okay? It's applied the same. Anytime you've got a situation where the property value is treated differently simply based on the value of the property, that's where there could be, I think, a constitutional question. But I'm not an attorney, and I follow everything with, but I'm not an attorney.
Thank you, Director. Any other questions? Okay, any other questions? Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, my question is for you as the bringer of the bill. Does this apply to people who rent? Because we.
Let's keep this to the amendment
Okay.
at this moment, but we'll get to that discussion.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions on the amendment?
Question?
Okay, no questions. Okay, all in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. All opposed? No. Okay, the amendment that was just put in passed, and Donna, if there's any questions on that wording, Representative, if you'd please make sure that that wording gets to Donna, and we'll make sure that's right. Okay, any other amendments for now that are,
Yes,
okay,
page 2.
Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on page 2, line 10, I would like to delete the rest of the sentence that starts with the word provided, that the exemption shall only apply to the first $1 million of the fair market value of the residential property, and put a period after the word property on line
Property,
10. So
right.
deletes the second part. So, does that make sense?
Yes, and let me just clarify, and you make sure I'm right. So what I believe this amendment is on line 10, right after property, we would put a period, and we would delete from provided that through all the way through line 13, that would all be deleted. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. All right.
I'm happy to try to explain why that is.
Well, let's see. Is there a second for that amendment? Okay, Representative Riggins seconded that amendment request. Okay, any discussion on it?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you, Representative.
So similar to what Director Hansen just said, the idea that if you're treating different properties differently based on their value, then you're going to run into the Constitution that says in Article 15, Section 11, that property needs to be treated equally and uniform. And so this is my dilemma with this bill, even though I know I worked on a similar bill last year that the governor vetoed. But I have been thinking about it some more since then. And in this case, the bringer of the bill, Mr. Chairman, yourself, you identified that the goal of this bill is to give short-term property tax relief to the homeowners that have been impacted by the post-pandemic rise in property values. However, this bill really discriminates against the very homeowners who have been impacted the most because their values are so high and because their rate of increase over the last 3 years has also been the highest. That does happen to be my constituents in Teton County. So just maybe to throw a little bit of math at this dilemma. So let's say the average home value in the state is under $400,000. So a $400,000 home would be valued, it would get a complete 50% because it's under the $1 million cap. And so it would get a 50% reduction. A very similar home to that $400,000 home would be valued at something closer to $2 million in Teton County. But it would only be able to get 50% of 1 million or 25% of its value reduced. It's notable that 79% of the residences in the state that have a value of over $1 million are in Teton County. And 64% of the Teton County residences are over $1 million. So these are I'm not as concerned about our second homeowners, but this would end up applying to those homes as well. Also for the discussion that we had earlier. So I just don't think it's a constitutional bill the way it's written. And I think, frankly, if we're going to engage in a discussion about the ballot initiative, we should write a bill that's closer to that, that mirrors that more closely, and understand what the impacts of that would be as a result. Frankly, given that 35% of all residential property tax in the state is generated in Teton County, it's a significant number, but we should treat the constituents of Teton County equally to the constituents of the rest of the state if we're going to do this. So that's my reason for bringing the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions, conversation? Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I have a question for the bringer of the amendment. If we eliminate this, wouldn't we also have to look at the backfill? Because I would imagine the backfill is not going to be sufficient. If we eliminate that, I think you're going to have to increase the level of backfill, because I don't think that's going to be close. I just wondered if the bringer of the bill had thought about that too.
Thank you, Mr. Wharf. Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Wharf. I did think about that. I believe you're correct. I just didn't have a chance to run the numbers yet. But yes, I think the backfill or the reduction to counties would be significant. And what's probably most important, I think, from the Teton County perspective is, so I think everyone knows, so the counties collect the tax. The counties then give the percentage that goes to the counties and the special districts, and then it goes to the school districts. The school districts take what's allowed by state law. And then when there's money left over, it goes back to the state for schools in other places. And Teton County is the only county that's actually generating those recapture dollars from residential property tax. Fortunately, we do have other counties, such as Converse and Campbell, that have, and Sublet at times, that due to the mineral industry has also provided additional dollars for schools in other parts of the state. But Teton County is the only county that provides that, those recapture dollars from the residential tax. And it's averaged about $85 million a year. So the other thing that's unique about Teton County is it's one of, I think, only 2 counties now that aren't levying the maximum levy. It levies at about 60% of everyone else's. And so it can actually raise its mill levy and provide those services even with this reduction. But it just means that the state of Wyoming is going to have less dollars for its school. So there's a lot to kind of put into that, but I would agree that we would need to look at a different fiscal note as a result.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Representative Lean.
Mr. Chairman, I'm against this amendment because I've had a chance to run the numbers and it inflates at about 30% when we remove that $1 million cap. And you're talking about a 30% increase on a significant amount of money of $389 million. So we're talking about almost the entire appropriation of the Craig report. And I don't know that appropriations will have anything to do with that. I think that that's a big ask to return all of that money to the state. On the same note, I understand that we're not trying to punish Teton County, but I also know that they don't collect their max mill levy because of the amount of revenue generated in that county. So I would be against the amendment because I don't think that we will get anybody any tax relief in the state if we put that in this bill.
Thank you, Representative Lee. Any other discussion? Representative Worf? Representative Lucas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, Director or Representative Storr, if you know the answer, but approximately how many properties are we talking about? There's 160 houses for sale roughly right now in Wyoming that are valued at more than $1 million. 20 are in Laramie County, lots in Teton County, of course, but just how many properties roughly are we talking about?
In Teton County?
Yeah. That would be valued at more than $1 million. I know there's probably three that aren't.
If I can just give one piece of data on that. I don't have an actual count of the number of homes, but roughly the houses in the state that are over, percentage-wise, that are over that 1 million, are roughly about 3.5%, I believe.
Okay.
And Mr. Gill can give more accuracy, but I believe that's pretty accurate. I've been over these numbers a few times, but
I bet you have.
so that percentage is roughly about 3.5%.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It gives me something to wrap my mind around right now while I'm puzzling.
Thank you. So any other discussion on this amendment? Representative Worf?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess when I go back and read this, the section that that's being proposed we remove says, provided that the exemption shall only apply to the first $1 million. To me, that's fair. That's fair. What it's saying is if you got a $4 million home, you get the first $1 million. Now, yeah, they're gonna have to pay the full tax on the $3 million, but they are getting the same break. If my house is only valued at $500,000, I don't qualify for $1 million reduction. I only qualify for that. So I'm probably gonna vote against this because I think it increases the complexity. It'll increase the demand for more of a backfill, and it's kind of an unknown right now. I myself think that this is fair and equitable because what it's saying is the first $1 million. If your house is valued at over that, you still only get the tax break for up to $1 million. If your house is less than $1 million, you still only qualify for a reduction. You don't get the benefit of saying, well, my house isn't worth $1 million, but I want a reduction of $500,000. It goes back to the fair market value of the house. So I think it is fair and equitable. It does provide relief, and it may not provide it as equitably as the people in Teton County would like it to do, but they still get the maximum benefit of the relief. Whereas people that were, I think the people we're trying to help, maybe the people that are in the mobile home type homes that are maybe not as high a value, but those people, and I know in my community, I had people saying they were worried about being taxed out of their homes. And so it is, to me, a matter of trying to be fair and give relief to everybody. Now, if your house is not worth that, you still get the same amount of relief. It's comparable to the value of your home. And so I guess with that, I'm probably going to be a no vote, just because I do think it would add the complexity to it. And I would like to just see it move forward. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Worf. Any other discussion on this amendment? Representative Riggins.
Maybe a point of information. If the bringer of the amendment, if there's any likelihood she's correct about the Supreme Court considering these things, if we approve this amendment, pass it forward, and Committee of the Whole says nonsense and gets rid of it, we're right back here with the original stuff. True or false? That's true, right? So I would support the amendment for that reason. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other discussion, or are we ready to vote? Very good. Okay. All in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. All opposed? No. The amendment fails. Okay. Any other amendments on the bill? Are we ready to vote? Well, no, you have another amendment?
I do have another amendment. It's a very simple one.
Representative Riggins has another amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Line 9, page 2, strike out 50%, insert 25%.
Okay, reducing it to 25%. Any discussion on the amendment, or we need a second?
Thank you.
Second on the amendment. Any discussion? Are we ready to vote?
Yeah,
Okay, Representative
offer the-
Riggins, go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer that amendment because that was the number in the previous legislation. Am I correct? A piece of legislation that passed by 90 votes in both chambers. And I don't want to provide excuses because we changed that number. We don't get those 90 votes anymore. Now, is it as good of a deduction as many people might hope? Probably not, but when I campaigned, I said broad-based property tax relief. And I was fully supportive last session when they had that. When that failed, I was kind of expecting, that's what we would see when we started here. So that's why I'm offering the amendment, and I'll conclude.
Any
my
other
comments.
discussion? We ready to vote on the amendment? Cool. Thank you. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate your amendment. I appreciate your reason for doing that. I'm wondering if it would be better to move the bill forward the way it is and let possibly the Senate go ahead and propose that 25% and see where we go there. Because then perhaps the people would have a better chance of seeing something work.
Any other discussion on the bill? Are we ready to vote? Questions?
All right, I kind of like the 25%, but if we leave the bill at 50%, there's gonna be 3 readings on the House before it gets to the Senate to decide if we're gonna do 25 from 50, bring it down to 25. So there's 3 readings on the floor. The question I have is the backfill, is that gonna help the backfill out more for the counties of what we've got in here, or is it gonna, we gotta recalculate that? Sorry.
I'll speak to that. Just, it's an issue. All of those are policy decisions. Whether we change the backfill, how we adjust the backfill, that will all be part of the policy decision as well as the 25%. So that will just be a decision that will be part of the conversation. So,
Just a comment. Just for clarification purposes, last SF 54 from the last session was 25%, and it was up to $2 million was actually what passed. So this bill does not, that would be more equitable to the folks in Teton County, but I also think it runs into the same problems, so.
there's no, Representative Wharf.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to make a comment, and I appreciate the bringer of the amendment. I'm aligning more with Representative Stiver. I think we're better off to minimize the amount of changes we make to this bill. Let's bring it forward to the floor, make those changes there. I think I want to keep the bill as clean as we can. We've already got one amendment. I think that's something that maybe the body, it'd be better to involve the body, leave it at 50. It can always be amended down. And so that would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Representative Wharf. Representative Riggins.
Mr. Chairman, I'll withdraw the amendment.
Thank you. Okay, any other amendments? Question? Okay, Donna, please call the roll. please call the roll for House Bill 169, homeowner tax exemption 2025 and 2026. Thank you.
Okay, roll call vote for House Bill 169 as amended. Representative Brown?
Aye.
Representative Campbell?
Aye.
Representative Lean?
Aye.
Representative Lucas?
Aye.
Representative Riggins? Representative Storer?
No.
Representative Stivar?
Aye.
Representative Worf?
Aye.
Chairman Locke?
Aye.
We have 8 aye and 1 no, Mr. Chairman.
House Bill 169, homeowner tax exemption 2025, 2026 is a due pass. And that, I believe, concludes our business for today. I would ask if the committee doesn't mind staying behind after we adjourned for just a brief moment. I just have some questions for you all, but not directly business related. But I do again want to thank everybody in this room for all your deep thought, your support to this process. And we will be working with all of you in the process. The process continues. Thanks again for your time, and sorry to take your Friday night, but have a blessed weekend. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.